Well, hello. Good afternoon. We're the last guys.
Thanks for hanging in there.
Thanks for hanging in there for us and everything. And we're going to be talking about entrepreneurism and everything. And I've certainly got some entrepreneurs here and two very distinguished panelists. So obviously, sitting at the very end, this guy's best known, obviously, for the careers of Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, and You've Got Mail. And then he founded a little company called AOL that did actually real well. And this man right here has been the former president of the National Science Foundation and did a phenomenal job, obviously. Everybody knows that, and is now president of Carnegie Mellon. So we've got, one of the top people in IT in history with one of the top material scientists in the world. So this is going to be a lot of fun. And I want to get it started. It's a great time to be alive. It's a great time to be here with you. But, we're in a very unusual time. I mean, if everybody remembers back when the patent officer in the turn of the century, the guy that said, everything's going to be invented, it's been invented, might as well close the patent office. And then in the 70s, what most people don't know is the guy that was running the patent office at that time said that, more will be invented in the next 100 years than in the history of mankind. And now everybody says more will be invented in the next 5 years than the history of mankind. And we've been hearing that all day because basically, all this is caused by the invention during certainly our lifetime in the last 20, 30 years of four things: the chip, software, storage, and internet. And then all day long, we've got to hear about all these incredible new things that are coming at us just at full speed, like AI, robots, nanotechnology, big data, genomics, 3D printing, avatar intelligent agents, and things like that. And a lot of things that may, at the end of the day, even capture jobs. So my first question is a really tough one to kind of, at the end of the day, as we sum up a few things and maybe go down a different path too, is I want to ask the distinguished panelists here with me, are humans inventing themselves out of work?
You want to start?
So I think the answer to that question is going to depend on whether the kinds of jobs that are being created with AI and machine learning and big data, et cetera, when they are replaced by machines, are there going to be newer jobs for people to create new robots, servicing the robots, writing software? And how many of those new jobs will be created vis-a-vis the number of jobs we lose? And those are going to be very different kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be the question. So the World Economic Forum is right in the middle of a number of future councils and looking at 2020 near term, 2030 midterm, and 2050 as a long term, what kind of displacements will take. But I think another way to look at this would be a slightly different question than this, rather than the number of jobs, which is only a crystal ball at this point. With all the technology that we have, and if you believe in the so-called, what we are supposed to be in the middle of the early stage of the fourth industrial revolution, which by definition is the convergence of the cyber world, the physical world, and the biological world. What are going to be the consequences of this compared to all the innovations that we created in the 20th century? So in 2000, the National Academy of Engineering came up with a report on the 20 greatest engineering achievements of the 20th century. 3 years later, NAE published the 14 grand challenges of the 21st century. If you put them side by side, you can't help but wonder why some of the grand challenges of the 21st century are a direct consequence of the greatest achievements of the 20th century. Securing cyberspace, containing nuclear terror, et cetera, et cetera. So every major innovation we create, there are intended benefits, unintended consequences, and willful abuse of technology. So the question would be, with things like artificial intelligence and machine learning and robotics, et cetera, how do we address the human condition in concert with the development of the technology. Some would argue that the reason for the 14 grand challenges of the 21st century from the 20 greatest achievements of the 20th century was because we did not pay attention to the intersection of the technology with the human condition. So I think one of the things we may want to look at is what is it that we did not do in the last century that we need to do in this century with respect to this new cohort of technologies that will avoid the problems that we created.
I agree with that. I'll just add a couple of things. First, it's inevitable that new technologies will destroy some jobs, whether it be AI or driverless cars or what have you. I think the challenge is how do you balance that with pushing new ideas forward that create jobs. You know, as Raul, you know, 200 years ago, over 90% of us worked on farms. Now it's under 2%. 88% didn't lose their jobs. We kind of went from the agricultural revolution to the industrial revolution to the digital revolution, which created new kinds of jobs. So how do we continue to create new kinds of jobs? And I don't believe we'll be successful in doing that. I don't believe we'll have a competitive nation. I don't believe we'll remain the most innovative entrepreneurial nation if we keep doing what we're doing, which is basically only investing, only backing a few people in a few places. Right. Last year, 78% of venture capital went to 3 states: California, New York, and Massachusetts. If you look at the states that Donald Trump won, 30 states, you add up all those states, all the venture capital went to all 30 states, 10%. So when people in those states feel like they've been left behind, kind of left out, they actually have been left behind and left out because the job creators often come, Kaufman says the majority of net new jobs comes from young, high-growth startups. We're only investing those in a few places. We're not going to have a evenly dispersed innovation economy. We're not going to have a lot of shots on goal, some of which will surprise us, and not just focus on tech entrepreneurship, but other things like Under Armour here in Baltimore or Chipotle in Denver. All kinds of companies have really broken through. So we need to, I think, level the playing field so everybody everywhere has a shot at the American dream. And I think that's the best way to maximize the odds that we're creating more new jobs than we're destroying. It's not just about place, by the way. It's also about people. Last year, 90% of venture capital went to men. 10% went to women. Only about 1% went to African American. About 1% went to Latinos. So I think we just have to move forward and try to make sure we are supporting entrepreneurs with ideas in a lot of different sectors, not just tech sectors, a lot of different sectors, a lot of different places, and that will, I think, maximize the odds of getting this right, and also in the process lift up some communities that are struggling, are feeling kind of left behind.
Steve, sticking with you, because you've got this new book out that's New York bestseller, The Third Wave, and that captured a little bit of it. And so, are we doing the right things to get the technology to the entrepreneurs, or is there just a gross shortage, like we've heard in here before at the Council on Competitiveness, of entrepreneurs? And maybe even a third question to add to that, since you're very involved in this, is can you teach entrepreneurs? Can you create entrepreneurs? Because there seems to be an abundance of technology right now.
Well, I think there's a lot of ideas out there. But opportunity has not been broadly dispersed. So it really goes back to this issue of trying to level the playing field. But the core thing, the reason I did write a book, I hadn't written a book before. I'm 58 years old, so it took me a while to get around to one, is because I realized as I was working the last few years, and including doing some of this, what we call Rise of the Rest, visiting cities like Pittsburgh, understanding what's happening in their startup communities, that something fundamentally different was happening, and the innovation, entrepreneurship, technology, the internet was shifting, and it took me a little while to figure it out. But the basic thesis of the third wave is it's focused on the internet. The first wave was building the internet and getting everybody connected. As you know, when we got started at AOL 31 years ago, only 3% of people were online, and they were online 1 hour a week. So we had to get America online. We had to build those on-ramps, those foundational technologies. Obviously, a lot of companies participated. And at the beginning of that, in the 80s, nobody knew about the internet or frankly cared about it. By the end of that first wave, called the year 2000, everybody was connected and couldn't live without it. That then set the stage for the second wave, which has been mostly the last 15 years or so, which is building apps and services, software, on top of the internet. So it's Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat and so it's basically this app economy. Mostly the first wave was PCs, the second wave shifted to smartphones, but it's basically about software and viral adoption of of software. And what's now happening with this third wave, which is now just beginning to accelerate, is integrating the internet in seamless and pervasive, sometimes even invisible ways throughout our lives, and change how we think about healthcare and learning and food and moving around and energy and other kinds of things. And these sectors change a little bit in the first wave and a little bit more in the second wave, but not that much, but they're going to change a lot in the third wave. But that's going to happen in different places than most people think. It's going to require, I think, a different mindset for both the entrepreneurs and the CEOs of large companies. I think partnerships are going to become much more important. It's going to require much more engagement with governments because these are regulated sectors, so policy is going to become more important. And also, these are hard problems, and so perseverance is going to become more important. So I talk about the 3 Ps. It's going to be much more important. Partnerships were not that big a deal in the second wave. Facebook didn't really need partners. Policy was not that big deal in the second wave until you got really big and had this global platform. It was not that big a factor, and perseverance wasn't there. Facebook and Snapchat actually were overnight successes, but I think that it's going to shift, and the big companies partnering with the small companies is going to be a defining characteristic of this third wave. And the folks on both the small company and the big company side that get that right, I think, will be the leaders, and the communities all around the country that get that right will rise up. Which is not saying Silicon Valley will fall. I think it's perfectly positioned to continue to do well, but I think we will see the rest rise. We will see innovation more dispersed across the country, and that's very healthy for the country. Right now, we have too many eggs in a few baskets, and it's risky.
That kind of leads us into you're talking about the corporate, private, public, and all that relationships and everything, but. Right now we've got an incredible country with obviously the best laboratories, the best universities in the world, and that kind of leads us a little bit into, as far as entrepreneurship goes, tech transfer, commercialization. And you and I had a chance, Subra, to testify in front of Congress on that about 4 or 5 years ago, but you weren't a university president. Now you are, and you've got one of the challenges is to do the tech transfer, commercialization, and what we're beginning to see come out of Carnegie Mellon is some pretty unique models of tech transfer, commercialization, including one with Uber and several others. Could you speak to us a little bit about that? And is that going to be something really good, and are the universities going to begin to adopt new models and see more tech transfer, commercialization of those great ideas?
So maybe I'll start with a personal data point. I was a young, when I started my academic career, I was a young assistant professor at an Ivy League school for 10 years. During those 10 years, I published quite a bit. During those 10 years, I did not have a single patent. Then the next 10 years, after the first 10 years, I moved to another university, well-known university. During those 10 years, I had 21 patents. Many were licensed. There was a spin-out company that came out of it. I wasn't any different. I wasn't any smarter. I had more opportunities available to me. The scientific work did not change. It's just the opportunities that were available to me were very different. At Carnegie Mellon, for example, about 10 years ago, there was a change in policy to encourage faculty to publish, or at least to disclose inventions. Internally, we call it 5% and go in peace. And which, within 2 years, that led to a 4-fold increase in the number of disclosures. When the Brookings Institution recently talked about case studies of why some cities that went through a serious economic decline were able to come up when other cities which suffered a similar fate could not reinvent themselves. They chose Pittsburgh as an example of a city, and they attributed one factor. This is according to Brookings Institution. Bruce Katz did the study on this. And the factor they said was, if major research universities exist in a city, they have an opportunity to contribute to the economic revival of the city. In the case of Pittsburgh, they attributed this to Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh. So those are some examples. Just in the last 7-8 years, Google set up shop in Pittsburgh, and their employee number 1 was our professor of computer science, and who went and started this operation. Now it's one of the largest revenue makers for Google anywhere in the world. And now they have several hundred employees. They are tripling their footprint in Pittsburgh. We actually got this faculty member who spent 10 years at Google back. He's my dean of computer science. In fact, I joked to senior executives at Google that the only reason he's coming back to the university is because we can pay him more than Google can. And so I think it's a two-way process. Same with companies like Microsoft, Uber, and others. I think it's a brain circulation of a different kind. Rather than you losing faculty members from our university to another university, now we lose them to industry. Industries of all kinds.
This is going to go to both of you because along the lines you're talking about right now, we hear a lot about the immigration issue. I know in my company, all of my scientists are immigrants, and it's been really tough with the visa program and everything else. But talk about that a little bit, Steve. You've obviously got Revolution. You're investing in a lot of companies. How serious of an issue is it, and is there any way to get it fixed quick?
No, it's very serious.
So we don't send away our Einsteins and our Werner von Brauns 1 year after getting their college degree, which we pretty well subsidized.
Yeah, no, it's a serious issue. But first, before I get into that, I want to just follow up on something around Pittsburgh. It's a perfect example of this rise of the rest phenomenon. And we spent a day together a couple of years ago, and the companies that are being formed there, partly because of the expertise Carnegie Mellon has and a lot of technologies, is really quite impressive. And the fact that Uber, one of the most iconic Silicon Valley companies, is kind of betting their future on Pittsburgh, because that's the center of gravity for their autonomous vehicle operation, I think is telling. And as I've traveled now a couple dozen cities in the last couple of years, that story is the case everywhere. And my favorite example, to point this out, is there's a company called Magic Leap that's in the mixed reality, augmented reality, virtual reality space. It's raised $1.4 billion of capital from Google in Silicon Valley, from Alibaba in China. And where are they located? They're not in Boston, they're not in New York, they're not in San Francisco, they're in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So you're starting to see this, and it will accelerate over the next decade. To your question, yeah. I'm very concerned about this. I worked on some of these issues, and President Obama asked me to be on his Jobs Council that Jeff Immelt chaired, and I led the effort around innovation, entrepreneurship. We came up with a number of policies. Some move forward, access to capital issues, including the Jobs Act and crowdfunding and on-ramp for IPO. The number one recommendation was taking steps to win what is now a global battle for talent. And I testified in favor of the Senate immigration bill. Sadly, it didn't move forward. It's obviously not going to move forward now in that current construct, but we have to figure out some way to move at least some components forward. And it's not just the H-1B, which the tech folks focus a lot on. It's particularly things like the startup visa. And the one example that I'd leave you with is there's somebody who graduated from Wharton, started a company, was starting to show some momentum, but he couldn't extend his visa, so he was forced to leave. So he went home. He happened to be from India, and that company, a company called Snapdeal, now has 5,000 employees in India. It's worth $5 billion, and he wanted to stay here. And I hear those stories every single day. And so I think we need to, of course we need, and we heard this today, focus on new ways to think about K-12 education, encouraging people to be more creative, teaching them to do things that machines can't do, all those kinds of things. So that obviously needs to happen. But we need to win this battle. And I remind people here in D.C., immigration is not just a problem to solve, it's also an opportunity that we need to seize.
Absolutely. And Subra, obviously you've run into this many times, and we're running slow, a little bit fast on time. So
yeah. So let me give an economic argument on immigration. Of course, I'm biased because I came with a one-way ticket and half a suitcase, and
thanks for staying.
Nearly 40 years ago.
Where did you hide out?
I was in Ames, Iowa. So, here is the economic argument that I would like to give, which is often overlooked in our conversation on immigration. Studies show that if a child is born today in the US, it costs the parents, on average, to raise the child from birth to age 22 through college, approximately $500,000 US, $400,000 to $500,000. Public school, private school, doesn't matter. That's the average, $500,000 a child. Let's say there are 100,000 students who come here, graduate students come here to get an advanced degree. And if we make it easier for them to stay here, some other taxpayer has already paid $500,000 each to those 100,000 students. These are the best and the brightest. If we can attract them to keep them here, 100,000 times $500,000 is $50 billion. That's 7 times the annual budget of the National Science Foundation. So in the second half of the 20th century, the US has been the undisputed innovation leader because all the other countries in the world have been subsidizing our innovation ecosystem much more than we pay through the US taxpayer money to the National Science Foundation. There is no substitute for cultivating domestic talent. But if you can cherry pick and choose anybody you want from anywhere in the world to come here, you can beat anybody in innovation. That's what we've been doing. If we lose that, we will lose that game. Last point, let's not forget it. This year, 6 Americans won the Nobel Prize. All 6 got their first degree abroad, all 6 of them. So that's my response to the immigration question.
No, that's pretty convincing, for sure.
Well, I just want to say one thing
okay.
more about it, which is, that's said, we both got obviously passionate about the issue. I don't think we all collectively have done a good job framing the issue.
Okay.
And I think this election is a good example. As I said earlier, a lot of people in a lot of places feel left out and left behind because in some ways they have been left out and left behind. And part of the reason in globalization, digitalization for them they view as a net negative, not a net positive. And immigration they view all too often as a net negative because it feels like people are coming and taking my jobs. So we have to make the case that entrepreneur startups create jobs and we have more people coming here taking some of those will end up being the big companies of tomorrow. 40% of Fortune 500 companies, as you all know, had at least one immigrant founder. So that we have to tell that story. This is about getting people who are going to help create the jobs that help lift up the communities. Yeah. But then we need to spread the wealth so it does, in fact, reach more people in more places. The more of those companies are in Pittsburgh or Des Moines or Atlanta or
so
Madison, not just San Francisco and New York and Boston.
All across the United States. You know, this is titled The Next Wave of American Entrepreneurs and everything. So you two will have an incredible perspective on this, and it'll be probably different. But what do you see? I mean, you know, we all grew up through the digital revolution, digital re-architecting of everything. Now we've got material science being completely disrupted. What do you see as the next big targets of disruption? If you want to get down to the companies like what we went through with the Kodaks of the world, where we saw, or Encyclopedia Britannica overnight, you know, do you see, are we still on that kind of run? And that kind of speed of disruption, innovate or die, and are there some real likely targets out there?
I would argue so. In fact, all this week, as you may know, the Wall Street Journal has been running a series on innovation, and they've interviewed a number of different people. I spent some time with the reporter for the Wall Street Journal just a few weeks ago, looking at different perspectives. I think the pace of innovation has never been stronger. The kind of students that we get today at the universities and colleges, these students are much more entrepreneurial, and they want to, they're not only entrepreneurial, and they have many more opportunities than a generation ago. Equally, they are eager to connect that entrepreneurial spirit with societal impact in ways in which their parents and grandparents did not do, which is wonderful for entrepreneurship. Yeah. So part of our challenge as university leaders is to make sure that we are not just training somebody in how to solve an equation or how to code a program or how to run an experiment, but how to adapt and think differently in a complex situation. I think adapting the education, teaching how to learn is more important than teaching a particular subject. And this is
very good.
And you mentioned Kodak. I think the story there is worth digging into a little bit, because the general view is Kodak was kind of caught sleeping. This digital photography thing came out of nowhere and eventually went bankrupt, and obviously it's trying to reposition. Well, actually what happened is Kodak engineers invented digital photography. Yeah. It was invented at Kodak. But the corporate leaders were not leaning in the future. They're kind of focused on protecting what was there, because frankly, the chemicals paper business was pretty profitable. So I think it's a reminder to all of us: you got to lean in the future. You got to focus on where things are going. You have to and the best way to do that, I think, in this third wave is to partner with entrepreneurs, not try to do everything in house, because you have a lot of smart people working for you. Guess what? More smart people work somewhere else. And so how do you create a network around your company so you're not left behind? You are part of the future, and you're playing offense, not defense. Clearly, as companies get larger, I saw this with AOL, certainly saw it after we merged with Time Warner, we did kind of shift from playing offense to playing defense, and you can't do that. And that, and I think figuring out how to continue to be nimble and flexible and more agile in a world that's speeding up, and how to focus on where things are going, and not just talk about it, but figure out how to execute against that is going to be one of the big challenges in the third wave. And I think the answer gets back to partnerships. The companies that do partnerships well are going to succeed. The ones that try to go it alone, I think, are going to be left behind.
Does that mean the small companies, which make up about 95% of the new jobs, need to partner? Is that what you're saying to that extent?
Yes. Yeah, and it's different.
The 90s are gone, where you just up and then sell real and all that, and so.
Well, I know you ran that play a bunch of times.
Yeah, and you did.
No,
too.
I think because of the nature of these sectors,
it worked out for both of us.
Take healthcare for example. If you want to revolutionize healthcare, of course, technology software is going to be part of it. But it's not like dropping an app in the App Store. You actually have to work with doctors and work with hospitals and work with health plans. That's going to require partnerships. If you really want to do something around rethinking learning, you kind of have to work with teachers or professors or partner with Carnegie Mellon. So this mentality that's all about the app, it's all about the software, it has to move into this world where it is about integrating important aspects of our lives and partnering with some of the players in that. And unless you do that as a small company, you may not get traction. Unless you do that as a big company, you may not stay relevant. So both are incented to do this dance.
We've got a minute left, and this is a great group here, and so I wanted to open it up for just a couple of questions while we're here. Anybody? And I can't see, so yes, sir, in the back.
Back in the 50s, GE and Westinghouse had apprenticeship programs that really provided a foundation for Rickover and putting a program in place for the nuclear navy. Provided really a systems integration. What is effective of looking at those types of apprenticeship programs and reestablishing those and providing that as a foundation for doing innovation? Because unless you're working and doing something, you're not going to create a better way to do that thing unless you have the foundation of doing it to begin with.
I agree. I think it'd be a great way for larger companies. Again, how do you figure out a way to be a magnet for people and ideas and get particularly young people in with different perspectives? And there are a bunch of different ways to do that, as I said earlier, but one way would be to do apprenticeships. And a number of companies are trying that. I think it will accelerate in the next decade.
We see that all the time with starting in the freshman year, the number of companies that come to attract students to go work for them. In fact, companies like PricewaterhouseCoopers hiring civil engineers. Connections that you would not have thought of just a few years ago as trainees. And this also gives companies an opportunity to choose which students they want to give offers to when they graduate, try them out in different locations. And in fact, some of the students at the end of their freshman year in some of our programs, they have multiple offers. Right at the end of the freshman year. So there are lots of these opportunities now on a global scale as well. Companies from around the world coming here, attracting students.
So before we go, maybe as a wrap-up, just what would you like to say or recommend to entrepreneurs? There's thousands, millions perhaps of those out there. You both have incredible experience in this area. How would you, in just a minute, say?
So I'll be very brief.
Yeah.
Innovation is a contact sport. And engage in that contact sport and come in contact with us, as many people like Steve who have succeeded, and as many people you can find who have failed but tried very hard.
I'd say two things. One, building on that, entrepreneurship is a team sport. So how do you assemble the right team? The people aspect's critical, but recognize, as I said earlier, in this third wave, the game is changing, and the rules that worked or the playbook that worked in the second wave, I don't think will work, or at least not work as well in the third wave. So things like partnership, really internalize. They're hard.
Yeah, they are.
It's hard to structure win-win partnerships, but it's important. Policy, it's hard. It's frustrating. Of course, you don't want to deal with government regulators. Of course, that's going to slow you down. But we're going to have some regulations about medical device safety and drones in the skies and driverless cars on roads. We're just going to. And so understanding that and leaning into that's important. Perseverance is also important. And the last one, as I said several times, is be more open-minded about place. 50 years ago, if you wanted to be in the entertainment business, you have to go to Hollywood. That's not true anymore. 50 years ago, if you wanted to be in the financial service, you had to go to New York, be on Wall Street. That's not true anymore. You've got all kinds of kind of cottage industries around creation of content, movies, music, all around the country, all around the world. People are running hedge funds and mutual funds, et cetera, from all around the country, all around the world. We're seeing now entrepreneurship regionalize and globalize, and trying to figure out where you should start the company, maybe because a partner is there. If something around some of the work that Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh does around building things and robotics, or the kind of things that other places, you want to care about agriculture technology, St. Louis because of Monsanto, or Omaha or Louisville might be the place to do it. So recognize the game's changing, but the positive is the opportunities in the third wave are unbelievable. These actually are the most important things in terms of our lives, some of the biggest sectors of our economy. So it's game on, but you have to adopt this different mindset.
Well, thanks. We definitely had two great panelists, and thank you for being here, and thank you, Council, and thank you, Deborah Wynn-Smith, for putting this on.
Happy 30th anniversary. Thank you.
Thank you.